Today, we're going to tackle a question that, believe me, trips up a lot of nonprofits. Do you actually need to register to fundraise in New Mexico? The answer is a little more complex than you might think, and getting it wrong, well, that can be a costly mistake.
Just before we jump in, this explainer is provided by the team at Ironwood Registrations. They're specialists who help nonprofits stay compliant with all these fundraising regulations across the country. So, in most states, right, the whole need to register is tied directly to asking for donations. Simple enough. But New Mexico, well, it kind of plays by a different set of rules. Registration there isn't just about fundraising, and honestly, that creates a compliance trap for a lot of organizations. So first, let's explore that broader scope. The key thing to get your head around is that in New Mexico, the requirements go way beyond your traditional fundraising activities.
And here's the critical distinction. In almost every other state, registration is triggered only when you solicit, when you ask for donations. But in New Mexico, that trigger is much, much broader. Simply existing as an organization or operating within the state can mean you have to register.
And this is where the urgency comes in. If your nonprofit is formed in New Mexico or even just operates there, you have just 30 days to get registered with the Attorney General's office. And that applies even if you haven't asked for a single dollar yet. Okay, so you figured out you need to register. What does that initial process actually look like? Let's walk through it. The very first thing you need to know is an acronym, NM-COROS. This is the state's mandatory online portal. You can't just mail in a paper form. Everything, and I mean everything, has to go through this system. Now, to file successfully, you'll need to have several key documents ready to go. You'll need your formation documents and bylaws, of course, your IRS tax-exempt determination letter, your most recent Form 990, if you have one, a current list of all your officers and directors, and finally, some key financial and fundraising disclosures. But here's a surprising little detail that's actually a bit of a relief. Unlike a lot of other states, New Mexico doesn't charge a fee for the initial registration. It's completely free to get that first filing done. All right, so you're registered, now what? This isn't just a one-and-done task, so let's look at what you need to do each year to make sure you stay in good standing. Now, this is another major difference from how other states do things. Your registration in New Mexico is continuous. It doesn't have an annual expiration date. Once you're registered, you just stay registered unless you formally withdraw it or the state cancels it for some reason. So, instead of a typical annual renewal, you'll file what's called an annual financial report. This report is mainly your IRS Form 990 for that year, along with some updated financial and organizational info. And yep, it's all submitted through that same NM-COROS portal. While there's no fee to file that annual report on time, there is a penalty for being late. If you miss the deadline, it'll result in a $100 late fee, so it is absolutely critical to keep track of your due dates. Next up, we need to talk about the numbers, specifically financial reporting, because for larger organizations, there are some additional requirements you really have to be aware of. So the crucial number to remember here is this, $750,000. If your organization's total annual expenses go over that amount, you're required to submit audited financial statements prepared by an independent CPA, along with your annual report. Of course, not every single organization has to go through this whole process. So let's cover which types of nonprofits are actually exempt from these registration rules. So the big question is, does this apply to absolutely everyone? And the short answer is no. New Mexico provides several pretty clear exemptions. The most common exemptions you'll see are for religious organizations, educational institutions like schools and universities, and also certain specific fundraising appeals for a named individual, as long as they meet a few specific conditions. And what's really, really helpful here is that these exemptions are automatic. If your organization qualifies, you don't need to file some special form or apply for exemption status. You're simply not required to register, period. Whew, okay, we have covered a lot of ground. Let's wrap this all up with the most important takeaways to make sure your nonprofit stays compliant in New Mexico. Here is your compliance checklist. Number 1, register within that 30-day window if you exist or operate in the state. 2, remember to file annual financial reports, not renewals. 3, keep a really close eye on your expenses for that $750,000 audit threshold. And finally, always, always evaluate your obligations based on your presence in the state, not just your fundraising. And this brings us to our final thought. The New Mexico rule is really a perfect example of a much bigger issue. It forces us to ask, is your nonprofit's simple presence in a state, any state, creating an unmanaged compliance risk that you haven't even considered? It's a critical question for any organization that's operating in more than one place.